So this time we're going to be talking about advanced use of curves. So we're going to go ahead and start by opening up the photo you should have downloaded. This is the photograph you should have downloaded, and it's got a pretty good point of interest, and it is on a rule of thirds, but the colors and everything are not quite there to really make this photograph sing. So we're going to add some curves layers. Let's go ahead and start with an adjustment layer. We'll grab curves. And one of the things is that it looks pretty washed out. So we're to go ahead and see if we can add some contrast. One of the ways that we can add contrast is through an S-shaped curve. So if we kind of darken some of the darks and brighten some of the highlights, that can help. Add a little bit of contrast in there. So far, not too bad. We're going to go ahead and add another adjustment layer for curves. And this time, I'm going to only pay attention to this area right here. I want to brighten these cacti. And so as I'm adjusting this, I'm going to watch those cactus and make sure I don't blow them out completely, but I do want them to brighten up a bit. So just watching that part. I don't care what's happening to anything else in the photograph. Just watching that. So that portion of the photograph looks pretty good to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to close this out, and I'm going to click on the layer mask. Now that I have the layer mask selected, I'm going to press Command-I on the Mac, Control-I on your computers. And what that does is actually inverts that color. So where it used to be white, it's now black. The whole thing is black. That means that I've just made this irrelevant. If I turn it off or on, it's no different because the whole layer is currently hidden by the mask. So now when I go over to my paintbrush and I get ready to paint on this layer mask, if I paint in white, it's going to begin to reveal what I had done before. I'm going to adjust the size of my brush here. So I'm using the bracket to increase the brush size. I can also right-click to increase my brush size. The brush is currently very hard, so I'm going to actually reduce the hardness to make it very soft. And then I'm going to start painting with the white. Now, I like it to not be too harsh right away, so I'm going to actually reduce the opacity of my paintbrush to about 50%. There we go. And so what happens now is you can see that I've painted this glow onto those cacti. So it's creating a bit of a highlight here for me to look at. I'm going to add another curves layer. There we go. I'm going to add another curves layer, and I'm going to try to darken the background. What I want is to get the background to be pretty dark. Whoops, I added one I didn't want there. There we go. We'll add those and those. So we've darkened the highlights and the shadows on this whole thing here. I'm going to hide that so I can see what I've done. And what I want to do is I'm actually going to make it go from dark in the background to light in the foreground. And the way that I'm going to do that is with the gradient tool. So remember, we're painting on our mask. So here's our layer mask. When I select the gradient tool, my gradient tool is currently set up to go from white to black. And there are a number of different ways that you can work with your gradient tool. So I have currently white to black. And if I click and drag with my gradient tool, you'll see that it puts that gradient on the mask. So it actually will cause the background to be darker and the foreground to be lighter. I'm going to play with that just a little bit, see where I want this to end. Just kind of looking here. And I think I like that there. Good, so now the background's a little bit darker than the foreground. I might want to paint in some highlights through here, so I've got some eye movement from front to back. And so I can take my paintbrush on this layer mask where it's darkening the background of the photo, and I'm going to change to black now. My black brush on these bushes here is going to brighten them a little bit because I'm painting away what that darkening layer is doing to those particular bushes. All right, if I want the darkening layer to affect any part of this foreground image, I can switch to white. And I can darken any part of this foreground image that I want to darken. Anything that's drawing my attention away from where I want it to go. All right, so I'm working with the light. The curves layers affect the contrast and the lights and the darks. And then when I paint on the layer mask for those curves, it is allowing me to stop the curves from affecting a certain portion of the image. So we're going to add another adjustment layer, another curves layer. And this time what I want to do is I'm going to select one of the channels. So instead of affecting the entire image, I'm actually only going to affect the colors. So here I'm choosing red. And first thing I want you to do is kind of take a look at how the red curve is actually affecting the overall image. So if I add red, pull it to the left, it's going to turn the image very red. It's adding red to the image. If I pull it to the right, it's actually making the image a lot cooler. In terms of RGB, the opposite of red is cyan, so it's kind of adding cyan in here. And if you look at the sky, that's actually what I'm really liking right now. I want to add some blue to the sky, so I'm pulling some blues back into the sky by pulling that red curve to the right. I'm not really concerned right now about what's happening to the rest of the image. I can pull some of the color back in there if I want by adjusting the curve, but I'm actually going to paint out the sky in this particular layer mask. So the blue that I added is only affecting the sky. There we go. I like the sky color. So we're going to go ahead and close that. I'm going to click on my layer mask for Curves 4. Call this sky blue. I'm going to invert it. So Command I or Control I on the Chromebook. Now it's basically hiding everything, and I'm going to paint the sky, or what I can do is try to select the sky. Your choice on how you want to do it. I'm going to go ahead and paint it out. I have my white selected here, so if I start painting in the sky, it's going to slowly start causing that sky to come back. Now, because I'm painting at 50% opacity, I'm going to have to paint over it a couple times in order to really have that show all the way through. So it's a slow change instead of a fast change. If I change this to 100% opacity, then it's going to change it right away. It'll go right away to showing that adjustment layer. Okay, so the sky has some blue in it, and I'm happy with that particular curves layer. Now I want to add some warmth and some yellows and greens into this foreground. So I'm going to add another curves layer. This time I'm going to try the blue adjustment layer. I'm going to see if I can pull some yellows in here. So the opposite of blue on the RGB spectrum is going to be yellow. So if I start to pull some yellows in here, that's going to affect almost everything right now, and I can choose where I don't want it to affect later on. So pull that out of the shadows. I like my shadows to be blue, and then my highlights are where I want my yellows to kind of pop. All right, so we've got some yellows in our highlights. Turn that off, kind of see what that looks like without it. Turn it back on. And what I want is for the yellows to hit this, this cactus here. I want the yellows to hit some of these branches in here so that it look like they're getting the warmth of the sun, and maybe a little bit back here, but not much else. So because I don't want it affecting everything, I'm going to go back to the layer mask, hit Command I again. I'm going to turn the entire layer mask black. I'm going to make sure that I'm painting with white on the layer mask. And then I'm going to start painting in here. And I'm going to change my opacity to 75%. It's not going to go all the way right away, but it'll allow me to change this somewhat. There we go. So we'll add some yellows into some of these areas where I want to draw the viewer's eye and attention, but nowhere else. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try and darken this a little bit more so I get a little more contrast in my foreground, so eye really goes to this rock and these cacti. So I'm going to add one more adjustment layer. One more curves. Affect all RGB. Darken those darks. Try to get my midtones back up a little bit here. Not so much the highlights. Let's see how that looks. Maybe a little bit far. Let's pull that back. I missed. Oops, there we go. Alrighty. So here we've got a pretty good set image. Now, the last bit of my tutorial is going to be for Photoshop. So Photopea doesn't really have this, and this is actually a brand new feature in Photoshop. So I'm going to stop this recording and I'm going to take us into Photoshop in just a moment. So if all you've got access to is Photopea, you're going to save this as a PSD. All right, so if you were following along in Photopea, you're essentially at this point. We've got a bunch of curves layers and we've got our background. I'm currently in Photoshop, and our sky layer should look something like this, where we've painted the white back in just in the top portion. So if I turn that layer off, we can see that the sky goes back to kind of blank. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to turn it off because we're going to be utilizing Photoshop's new sky replacement feature. So I'm going to select the background image, make sure that's the layer that's selected. I'm going to go to Edit, Sky Replacement, and the sky replacement screen should pop up. Now, as we go through here, you're going to see that you have multiple options for skies that you can throw in here. Some of them look good, some of them don't look so good. So you can kind of see how this is going. They're trying to match the color of the ground with the color of the sky, so it actually does some jumping around. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to select the one that I wanted was down here. So I want that one. And the beautiful thing is I have to do no masking. Since the sky was a pretty good cutout, I don't have to do any masking myself. Photoshop's doing it for me. And I can make some adjustments to try and shift the edge to make it look the way I want it to. So you can see it kind of blends the old background with the new background by shifting the edge. I'm going to pull it pretty far down since I actually like the way it looks here. I can choose to fade the edge quite a bit, or try to get it to knock out a little bit better. I actually like it more like it is right now. Kind of watching the colors in the background to make sure it gets a good match to what I want it to look like. I can adjust the brightness of the sky, and I can adjust the darkness of the sky. So this photo is pretty dark. I want it to look like it's pretty close to sunset. The last little bits of light are hitting in here. I can change the scale of the sky if I want it to look different. It's a different part of the photograph. That's a little bit too much. There we go. And I can even change how it's blending with the background. That's not good, so I'm going to go back to multiply. That's pretty good. I can show lighting adjustment, how much it's modifying the image it's blending with, and the color adjustment, how much it's affecting the color of the ground that it's blending with. So there's a lot of adjustments I can make in here. I think that's pretty close to what I want. And I'm going to hit OK. And with the new layers selected, what happens is it adds in these layers where it automatically creates a layer mask for that sky image and an adjustment for the lighting of the foreground. So that's all stored in this sky replacement group folder. So if I hide that folder, it goes away. Show that folder, there's the sky. So just kind of a quick, interesting way to replace the sky in any photograph you want using Photoshop 2021. Save that as a PSD. And upload that.